And after that splendid proposition by the proposer, I wondered, however can I follow that? And I thought, how can any of us follow that? Because I'm not proposing to defend Tarek Ali, I'm not defending Christopher Hitchens, I'm not saying that Theresa has done no good whatsoever in the universe. We're discussing whether she should be honoured for her legacy. If just that somebody has done some good constitutes honouring them for their legacy, then my deceased mother could also be a Saint Gladys, who would actually give tiny sums of money from her tiny amount of pension, which is probably proportionately far more than, dare I say, wealthy barristers proposing this proposal. But let's think a little more though. Suppose you have a woman, Theresa, and you are aware that she has damaged the prospects of millions of people, or at least hundreds of thousands of people. We obviously ought not then to honour her, should we? So there's a damage problem. Suppose you find that this woman, Theresa, has in fact been hypocritical. She claims that she's doing great good, when in fact she isn't. Do we actually think that's something to be honoured? Thirdly, suppose that in fact the motivation is more of a self-serving motivation for her own glory. Would we honour that? I suspect not. Fourthly, maybe in addition, whilst people are very, very hungry and undoubtedly suffering a lot, she goes off to rich banquets with a few dictators and perhaps even wines and dines. Of course, I'm not talking about Mother Theresa now, I'm talking about Theresa May. But that is a non-political But in my non-political comment there, I'd say that Mother Theresa has some of those attributes. With regard to the damage, it is true that Mother Theresa, indeed, being a Catholic, being a good Catholic, such as the proposers here, was a very, very strong Catholic with regard to sex. Namely, she opposed contraception, she opposed abortion. As a result of that strong opposition, in very big terms, lots and lots of people have suffered over the years. That is part of her legacy. True, you may say that she is being used by the Catholic Church. I'm sure that's true to some extent. But nonetheless, you don't honour the legacy of somebody who has been a marketing tool of the Catholic Church. You might indeed feel sorry for her. You might think she was doing her best and so on. But nonetheless, the debate is about honouring the legacy. Let's remember that. We're not trying to be nasty against this little elderly woman who is now deceased. In fact, I can even be very understanding and friendly towards my proposers here, even a wealthy barrister. I await the quips about an unwealthy philosopher, but that may come along later on. So with regard to the actual future, I think Mother Theresa, we're putting Theresa May to one side at the moment, has actually damaged the prospects of many, many people in India and elsewhere by her being a great figure of the Catholic Church. And the reason for that is the Catholic Church is still typically so strongly opposed to contraception, so strongly opposed to abortion, and as a result, many, many lives, particularly women's lives, have in fact been led into rather unhappy states of suffering. Let's remember that it really is the case that because many people have been brought up in that belief that families have very, very large numbers of children, and indeed they are destitute and they suffer. My colleague on my side will indeed be able to point to the particular details of the damage which Mother Theresa has been doing. I'm talking there about the bigger picture to do with the mistreatment of women in general, not having control over their bodies. I'm not getting at Mother Theresa in particular. I'm saying we ought not to honour her legacy. She is part of that big Catholic legacy which leads to a huge amount of suffering. So that's the damage part of the story. You ought not to honour the legacy of somebody who has led to such damage. That doesn't mean that therefore I think we should be honouring the legacy of North Korea, or even Ronald Reagan, or even maybe friends of our proposers there, Mr. and Mrs. Trump. We are in fact talking about Theresa May, of course. We're not doing comparison issues here. Secondly, I mentioned in my list against Theresa May some degree of hypocrisy. Well, I do believe that dear Mother Theresa was actually rather keen to express at times that she's very much concerned for the suffering of the poor, but at other times she says this is part of God's will. The suffering is actually a part of the passion of Jesus It's a part of the idea that suffering is an essential part of being a human being. That strikes me as rather hypocritical, particularly if you link it to the thought, which seems to be a thought which he had, namely that we need to have suffering in the world because then some people can show the virtue of compassion. I suspect the people who are suffering a lot would much rather not be suffering than be the means for people such as Mother Theresa to be able to manifest their compassion. So let's remember, therefore, there's a hypocrisy issue going on there, and there is a big issue which some theologians are well aware of about how is it that a so-called loving God can permit so much suffering in the world, to which one answer has been, well, that means other people, such as Mother Theresa, could indeed manifest compassion. As I said, I doubt if many people would think, oh, that's great, I really like suffering here because I'm helping somebody else to be compassionate. That's the point to do with hypocrisy. And the third point, of course, which I mentioned against Theresa May, is the idea of motivation. What is really going on here? Is Mother Theresa really concerned about the poor, or is she in fact concerned about her means to heaven? That raises a very big question, of course, with regard to all Catholic believers and other religious believers. Do they only do good because they think this is what they have been told to do by God or some supreme being in order to secure eternal life? Of course, I don't think Theresa May is expecting an eternal life, just maybe another prime ministership, which is going to be very unlikely, but arguably Mother Theresa really was seeing this is her way to heaven or to some sort of eternal life, or would increase her likelihood. Again, I'm not strongly criticising her as a person. We all have our different foibles. I might end up drinking too much red wine later on today. In fact, I shall now. I really enjoy that. And I should have drank more red wine before this, and I wouldn't even be standing at the moment. So I'm not particularly blaming Mother Theresa for being in that position, though we could discuss that in more detail. I am trying to make the point that her legacy does not merit such honour. And of course, we could add the fourth point in which I quipped about Theresa May going off to these great banquets, as she then supplies Saudi Arabia with arms to kill lots of innocent people or to harm them. Mother Theresa did indeed have various connections with some dictators and some fraudsters. Maybe that was for the good, maybe she didn't wine and dine, maybe she did indeed get money out of them to further her cause. But nonetheless, we would not say this is something which she deserves great honour. So those are the four reasons, or the four areas, which lead me to be very much concerned about this proposition that we should honour Mother Theresa. I think we can look at it in a wider context as well, because as Christopher Hitchens did quip, but there's a truth behind the quip, namely that Mother Theresa was indeed friend of poverty, but not friend of the poor. She did really seem to believe that part of Jesus Christ's plan, or part of God's plan, I never understood how God and Jesus Christ are one and the same, yet one's Father and one's Son, but that's probably my core understanding. I'm sure these friends of mine will be able to explain one day. But nonetheless, it's meant to be part of the great plan that there is suffering in the world, and so she wanted the poverty to carry on to some degree, because that would enable her, as I said, to further her cause. In a sense, you could see her as an unwitting drug dealer. Namely, she dealt in opium. She was the opium of the people person. She was encouraging the poor and the sick and the needy to accept their lot in the main. She'll do a little bit of help, but really accept your lot. This is part of God's great plan. I believe that's a little bell in my ear as well. So that's the point to do with opium. We should think of her really as a drug dealer, maybe an unwitting one, but she is dealing in the religious drug that you should accept your lot in the world as part of the great plan. I would also make the point again, which I've already alluded to, that a part of that great plan is therefore to put up with the amount of suffering and evil in this world. If we think about it, is that really something which we would like to support? Is that really something which we should start honouring? Wouldn't it be far better not suddenly to say we are going to support Tariq Ali or North Korea or Christopher Hitchens, whatever other little false gods are suggesting here, but to recognise that things are going to go much better. We do acknowledge that we should take control of our lives and should recognise that we do actually have to help people who are suffering on this world instead of using them as a means to a divine end. So, I end my little talk here by recommending that you reflect on the fact that Mother Teresa as a person may have been doing her best, may have been very sincere at times, but nonetheless the legacy of that person, the result of that person, is not something to be honoured, but is something to be very, very gloomy about, because it has led to far more suffering in the world than otherwise would have been. She was sadly a marketing tool of the Catholic Church. She was a friend of poverty, not of the poor, and therefore we ought not to support this motion. Thank you.